In this video, we're going inside one of the most explosive moments the British royal family has experienced in recent memory. A private ceremony, a crown soaked in decades of grief and love and legacy, a deliberate act by Prince William and Princess Anne that sent shockwaves through the palace walls. And in the next room, Queen Camilla, screaming. Not whispering, not composing, a carefully worded objection. Screaming. By the time this video ends, you will understand exactly why. And you will never look at the British monarchy the same way again. Let's establish what we are actually talking about here. Because the details matter, and the details are extraordinary. Diana's crown, the one most emotionally associated with her legacy. The one that carries the weight of a life cut short, and a public love that has never dimmed, was returned to Catherine, Princess of Wales. In a private ceremony inside the palace, William placed it in her hands. Princess Anne stood as witness. Charles was not in the room, and when Camilla found out, something broke open inside her that decades of careful composure had been holding together. That is the event. Now let's talk about everything underneath it, because this goes so much deeper than jewelry. This is about power. This is about who controls the future of the British monarchy. This is about a woman who spent 30 years clawing her way to the top, and a single afternoon in which she watched the architecture of everything she had built begin to crack. And this is about Diana Spencer, who has been gone for nearly 3 decades and is somehow more present in this family story today than ever before. To understand why this moment hit with the force that it did, you have to understand what Diana's crown actually represents. Diana did not simply wear jewelry. She wore statements. Every piece she chose communicated something deliberate to the world. She understood that in the absence of political power, symbolic power was everything, and she wielded it with a precision that the establishment never quite learned how to counter. The crown most associated with her legacy has carried since her death something that transcends decoration. It is a declaration. It says that what Diana stood for, the warmth, the humanity, the radical willingness to reach across the invisible wall that has always separated the royal family from ordinary people, that did not end when she did. It endured. It was waiting for someone worthy to carry it forward. William has always understood this. He grew up inside the tension between the institution that raised him and the mother who humanized him. He watched what Diana's connection to the public meant during her life. And he has watched what her memory has meant after her death. And he has made a decision, not impulsively, not emotionally, but with the kind of strategic clarity that people who underestimate him consistently fail to anticipate. He decided that Diana's legacy belongs to Catherine. He decided it formally, privately, deliberately, and he chose Princess Anne to witness it. The choice of Anne is not incidental. It is everything. Anne is not a woman who participates in gestures. She does not lend her presence to moments she does not fully believe in. She has built her entire reputation over decades of royal service on a foundation of unflinching directness and an almost fierce commitment to doing what she believes is right for the institution. Regardless of how uncomfortable that makes anyone around her, she does not perform. She does not play politics in the soft, smiling way of those who use warmth as a weapon. When Anne shows up for something, it means something. It means she has looked at the situation clearly and decided this is where she stands. Her history with Diana during Diana's marriage to Charles was complicated. There is no point pretending otherwise. They were not close. There were tensions. The world knew it. But death has a way of clarifying what life obscures. And Anne, watching from the position of decades of institutional experience, can see what William can see. Diana's hold on the public is not fading. It is compounding. Every year she becomes more mythologized, more central to the emotional identity of the British monarchy, more important to the story the royal family tells about itself. Pretending otherwise is not just emotionally dishonest. It is strategically catastrophic. So when Anne stood in that room as William placed Diana's crown in Catherine's hands, she was not making a sentimental gesture. She was making an institutional declaration. She was saying, with the full weight of her unimpeachable reputation behind it, that this moment matters, that this is the direction, that this is the future. And crucially, she was doing it without Charles. Let that sink in for a moment. The king was not in the room. His son and his sister moved together, privately, deliberately, and made a decision that will shape the monarchy's identity for generations without waiting for his presence or, depending on which explanation you believe, his permission. There are two possible explanations for Charles's absence, and both of them are seismic in their implications. The first possibility is that Charles knew and approved, that he quietly encouraged William to make this move, understanding that the long-term credibility of the monarchy requires Catherine to carry Diana's legacy forward, that he accepted, perhaps even endorsed, the fact that this would effectively sideline Camilla's influence over the institution's emotional future. If this is true, it represents a remarkable and devastating act of clarity from Charles. It would mean he chose the crown over his wife. It would mean that somewhere beneath the years of carefully managed rehabilitation of Camilla's public image, he still recognizes that Diana's place in this story is permanent and non-negotiable. The second possibility is that Charles did not know, that William and Anne coordinated this independently, moving through a window they believed Charles would not close but might not have opened himself. If this is true, the implications are even more staggering. It would mean the heir to the throne is already operating with a degree of autonomy that effectively challenges the sitting king's authority. It would mean Anne has aligned herself with the next generation, rather than the current reign. And it would mean that when Camilla started screaming, part of what she was screaming about was the dawning realization that her husband may no longer be the most powerful force in the room. Which explanation do you believe? Hold that question. We're coming back to it. Now let's talk about Camilla. Because to understand the fury of her reaction, you have to understand what she was actually reacting to. She was not screaming because William gave Catherine a piece of jewelry. She is far too sophisticated for that. She was screaming because of what the act communicated, what it meant to every person inside and outside those palace walls, and what it said about her own position in the story of this family. Camilla has spent 30 years building toward a single outcome: legitimacy. She endured public hatred of a kind that would have dismantled most people. She absorbed the blame for the breakdown of the most famous marriage in the world. She waited while the tabloids savaged her and the public refused to accept her, and the institution she wanted to belong to kept her at arm's length. She waited with a patience and a discipline that history has never quite given her credit for. And eventually, she outlasted it. The coverage softened. The public shifted from outright hostility to grudging tolerance. She became queen consort and then queen. She wore the crown. She survived. For Camilla, that crown is not jewelry. It is vindication. It is the physical, undeniable proof that she endured, that she prevailed, that history, which once seemed entirely committed to writing her as the villain of this story, had ultimately rewritten her as the queen. That was her foundation. That was everything she had built. And her entire strategic position rested on a single premise: that Diana's era was over. That the grief eventually fades. That time and carefully managed appearances and the slow drip of positive coverage eventually neutralizes the emotional power Diana still holds. For a time, that strategy appeared to be working. And then William placed Diana's crown in Catherine's hands, and 30 years of careful construction began to shake. Because that single act communicated something that no PR campaign can neutralize, and no charitable appearance can counter. It said, Diana won. It said Diana's legacy is alive in Catherine. It said the man who was Diana's son has looked at the landscape of this family and made his choice. And his choice does not include Camilla's version of this story. The narrative Camilla had spent 3 decades trying to close was reopened in a single afternoon, and it was reopened by the one person she could never argue with publicly: Diana's own child. That is not a symbolic defeat. That is an existential one, because it whispers the one thing Camilla has spent her entire public life trying to silence. You are always temporary. You are always the interruption. The real story, Diana's story, continues without you. The screaming was not a tantrum. It was a woman confronting the thing she had built her entire strategy around avoiding, her own irrelevance in the eyes of history. Now let's look at the woman at the center of all of this, because in every account of this story, Catherine is described with a consistency that is itself revealing. Composed, dignified, receiving the crown not with any visible triumph, but with the quiet gravity of someone who understands exactly what they are being asked to carry. She didn't perform the moment, she didn't allow it to become a weapon. She simply accepted it for what it was, an acknowledgement of what the public has been saying about her for years. That restraint is not passive, it is one of the most sophisticated forms of power available to her. Catherine has watched carefully how this family treats people who reach too far, too fast, too visibly. She watched it happen to others. She absorbed the lesson. Her entire approach to royal life has been built on patient, methodical positioning that keeps her above the fray, even when the fray rages directly around her. When William placed Diana's crown in her hands, she did not gloat. She did not brief a journalist. She did not allow a friendly source to leak the story to a sympathetic tabloid. The story leaked anyway, as these things always do inside palace walls, but not from her direction. And that restraint is itself a declaration. While Camilla was reportedly screaming in the next room, Catherine was somewhere else entirely, likely with her children, likely engaged in the quiet, purposeful life that has made her so genuinely beloved. She didn't need to be in the room when Camilla reacted. The crown was already in her hands. The witness had already spoken. The act was already permanent. History doesn't wait for everyone to agree with it. There is a larger story being told here, and it is important to see it clearly. The British monarchy is navigating a generational transition that is arguably the most consequential it has faced in nearly a century. It is operating in a world that is more skeptical, more connected, more democratically minded than any world the royal family has had to contend with before. The old tools of royal power, secrecy, distance, the mystique of inherited authority are becoming less effective with every passing year. The public demands more now, more transparency, more accountability, more evidence that this institution actually earns the extraordinary privilege it holds. In that context, what William and Anne did was not simply a family moment. It was a statement of institutional direction. It said that the monarchy's future lies with authenticity, with genuine human connection, with the emotional truth that Diana embodied and that Catherine carries forward. Not with the careful management of optics, not with the suppression of inconvenient history, but with a full and honest engagement with who this family has been and who it chooses to be. That is a radical statement for one of the most conservative institutions on earth, and it may be exactly what saves it. Diana once said she wanted to be a queen of people's hearts. That phrase has been quoted so many times it risks losing its meaning. But sit with it for a moment. She was describing something specific. A kind of power that doesn't come from protocol or title or the weight of institutional authority. A kind of power that comes from being seen, from making others feel seen, from showing up fully and humanly in a world that expected you to remain remote and untouchable. William has looked at his wife, a woman who visits children in hospitals without photographers present, who speaks candidly and personally about mental health struggles, who shows up not as an icon performing warmth, but as a person genuinely feeling it, and he has decided she already is that queen. The crown was the formal acknowledgement of something that had already happened in the hearts of millions of people long before that private ceremony ever took place. Royal families do not fight with words, not openly. Not publicly. They fight with symbols. A seating arrangement at a state dinner, a name listed first in an official program, an invitation extended or pointedly withheld, a crown placed in one woman's hands and not another's. These are the weapons of palace warfare, and they are far more devastating than anything spoken aloud because they cannot be argued with directly. Camilla has long understood this language. She spent years using it herself, navigating her way from the margins of acceptable royal life to its center through a series of carefully managed symbolic moves. Each public appearance calibrated, each gradual elevation of her role a small but deliberate step forward. She wrote the playbook on royal symbolism as strategy, which is exactly why William's move hit her with such force. He had beaten her at her own game, and he had done it using Diana. The question Camilla now faces is the hardest one of her public life. The question is no longer whether she can recover the position she held before this moment. That window has narrowed in ways that are difficult to overstate. The real question is whether she can find a genuine role, not a ceremonial one, not a managed one, in the new landscape that William and Catherine are building. That requires something that does not appear to come naturally to her in this particular arena: acceptance. Acceptance that Diana's shadow is not something to be managed or gradually diminished, that it is part of the permanent architecture of this family, that Catherine is not her rival in any meaningful sense of the word, because rivals compete for the same thing, and Catherine is competing for a future while Camilla is fighting to protect a past. The screaming, the fury, the cold silence that reportedly followed. These are the reactions of someone still engaged in a battle that the next generation has already moved beyond. Whether Camilla can make the transition from fighter to witness, from someone determined to hold her position to someone willing to let the institution evolve around her, will determine her legacy more than anything else she has done or could do. History will record what happened in that room: the crown, the witness, the act. That story has already been written. The only story Camilla still has the power to author is what she chooses to do next. Charles, the man at the center of all these relationships simultaneously, the father and the husband and Diana's former spouse, reportedly attempted to smooth things over in the aftermath. This is consistent with everything we know about him. He is more diplomat than warrior, more inclined to manage conflict than to meet it directly. But managing this particular conflict is more complicated than most, because you cannot negotiate with a symbol. You cannot unsay what a crown communicates. You cannot call back a witness once she has witnessed. The act is done. The declaration has been made. And to the question of whether Charles knew or whether his own son moved around him, is one that the palace will carry quietly for a very long time. What we are watching when we step back far enough to see the full picture is a monarchy in the act of choosing its own future. Deliberately, with full awareness of the stakes. William and Anne, the next generation, and the old guard, united in an unlikely alliance, have made a declaration about what this institution will be. They have said that the future belongs to Catherine, that Diana's legacy lives in her, that the monarchy's survival depends on honoring emotional truth rather than suppressing it, that the people whose love and loyalty and investment make the institution possible in the first place deserve a monarchy that shows up for them the way Diana showed up, fully, humanly, without the protective armor of practiced distance. That is the promise being made, and Catherine, in her quiet, composed, strategic way, is already living it. The British monarchy has stood for 1,000 years. It has survived abdications and wars and scandals that should have destroyed it. It has survived because it has, at critical moments, been willing to change, to let the old give way to the new, to recognize that the institution is not the building or the title or the protocol. It is the relationship. The relationship between a crown and a people who choose, generation after generation, to invest their history and their emotion and their identity in what that crown represents. William knows this. Anne knows this. Catherine lives it. And somewhere in the palace, the echo of screaming is still hanging in the air. If you have made it this far, I want you to do something. Subscribe so you are in the room when the next chapter of this story breaks, because it is coming sooner than any of us expect. Like this video if you believe Catherine is the true inheritor of Diana's legacy. Share it with someone who loves this story as deeply as you do, because this conversation deserves to be had widely and honestly. And here is the question I want you to take into the comments and sit with tonight, the one I genuinely want your perspective on. If Diana could have chosen, with full knowledge of everything that has happened since her death, the person who would carry her legacy forward into the future of the British monarchy, do you believe she would have chosen Catherine? And if so, what is it about Catherine specifically that you think Diana would have recognized in her? Tell me below. Your answer to that question says something important, not just about Catherine, but about what Diana meant to you, and what you believe the monarchy should be. The crown has been returned. The witness has spoken. The next queen has been chosen. Comment your thoughts. Every single one of them matters.